Heather, as we remember the victims of the Connecticut school shooting, we are learning more about the shooter. There are unconfirmed claims that he had a personality disorder, possibly Asperger's syndrome. Columnist Charles Krauthammer talked yesterday about the lack of support in the mental health system for families.
Many years ago, I would commit people against their will from the Massachusetts General Hospital to state hospitals if they were a danger to themselves and to others. It's become much harder to do. It's not something any psychiatrist ever does lightly. But the dilemma for a parent is that you're in these terrible relationships because of the rise of civil liberties and the experience that we had in the 50s of the abuse of incarceration of the mentally ill. Where it becomes impossible. And they'll say to a parent, until he does something, our hands are tied.
Well, so what are families to do? So let's ask psychotherapist and school counselor Thomas Kersting. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Briefly, we're hearing a possible Asperger's angle here. There's no evidence that people with Asperger's are
Yeah,
violent.
I've heard that. I've gotten emails from people about that. And, you know, there is no evidence that, you know, somebody with Asperger's has violent behavior. They might have social awkwardness. But, you know, to link the two is, I think, too premature.
Okay. Now, getting back to the root causes of this type of thing, a lot of people are pointing to our changing culture. The shooter played violent video games. So did the Columbine killers. Fans of these games do not want to hear any link between the two. But what say you?
You know what? I talk to parents about this all the time. And I have young kids. And I see my kids' friends, you know, playing these violent video games. Not something I would ever do with my own kids. And I preach this to families. You know, we want to keep our kids. I said this yesterday. We want to maintain our kids' innocence. They do not need to be exposed to violent video games. Part of the problem, I think, is that parents have become desensitized. They see what other parents are doing in the community. Well, you know what? Johnny has this game. Sarah has this game. And suddenly, you know what? I guess it might not be that big of a deal. I'll get it for him.
And you use that word desensitized. That's the other thing that we're hearing is about movies, that people watch enough violence and all of a sudden they become numb to the thought of it.
Well, absolutely. I mean, whatever you're pumping into your subconscious mind is becoming your reality. So you become desensitized to stuff. If you're doing something or repetitively engaged in a stimulating activity over and over again, you know, your brain will actually create new neural pathways that are consistent with that. So you could become, you know, completely desensitized to violent video games and become a killer almost. Think of, you know, just think of all of these things that have been happening over the last several years going on. I mean, there's got to be a connection here.
But of course, you know, people will say there are plenty of people who watch these movies, play these games, don't have that. So there are other vulnerabilities there, we could assume. So let's get to that. Lack of family time, you say, one of the keys.
This is something I talk to families about all the time. I give talks about it all the time. You know, people may think that they're having quality family time if they're home together, but I look at a lot of families in America nowadays as being individuals living under the same roof. Dad's on his cell phone, mom's watching television, Johnny's playing video games, and the other kid might be doing some other, listening to her iPod, texting, and we have individuals completely distracted and not engaged and not living together as families.
Right, and family dinner, you say, really important.
Family dinner, something that's very important to me. That's kind of a lost art, as I call it, in our country nowadays. And I think it's critical that families now take the time to actually sit down, make a commitment, have meals together, and keep all the distractions away while you're doing that.
Yeah, no gadgets during dinner.
Definitely
All right.
not.
Thomas Kersting, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
All right, and the time right now, 26 after the hour. And still to come, it's their job to protect employees against unfair union practices, but a new report says the NLRB was actually looking after the unions. And a victory celebration goes wrong, sending several fans spilling onto the football field. We'll have that story.